Welcome to All Things Moore County, Moore County's weekly radio show highlighting the many facets of the Sandhills. That includes real estate, lifestyle, community and neighborhoods. And now from 4 Properties, here's your host, Bill Sahadi.
Good morning and welcome to the talk show, All Things Moore County. Dorothy, thanks for that introduction.
You're welcome, Bill.
That's one of those large and in charge songs that has a special beat.
Yes, it does.
And, you know, driving over here to tape the show, I heard the song and I said, wow, that song would very accurately fit my guest today. and the topic that we're going to talk about requires somebody who's kind of large and in charge. And in our real estate business, one of the most important facets of the process of purchasing a home and selling a home is the home inspection that is done long after the contract has been ratified. And the buyer and the seller are in what they call due diligence. And in the 20 years that I've been in this business, we've sometimes home inspections kind of come up and rear their ugly head, or they can be very seamless. It all depends on how it's presented to the client. And our guest today is John Pavan of Accurate Home Inspections. And John has been a real go-to home inspector for me and for a lot of the brokers in our office. And we've been very pleased with him. But he was also very good to come in and be willing to talk a little bit about the home inspection process in the hopes that people who might be sitting on the sidelines thinking of selling their home, or buyers who are in the market, they might need a soup to nuts explanation of the home inspection process, what's included, what's not included. And we have John for the whole hour, and he's not shy. And when he approaches a house and he starts a home inspection, he pulls up in his truck and he comes in with his tools, and, you know, it's his baby for those 3 or 4 hours. And I've got a lot of respect for him, how he does his job, and most importantly, how he communicates with our client after the fact. He doesn't just make statements without supporting them, backing them up, explaining them, and sort of softening sometimes what might appear to be something inflammatory that is not. And John, your communication skills get put to a test, don't they? Sometimes in working with clients, because they do want to be able to talk with you after an inspection for clarification, for clarity.
That's correct, though it varies greatly. There are people I never hear from. I like to think that that's because the report is thorough and with a lot of pictures.
Right.
And then there are other people who will call me, and we will literally go through the report, by phone, with each of us having it open on our computers.
Right.
And we'll go through every item, which is fine with me. In a way, I kind of surprised more people don't go over at least some of it. One thing I try and do on a report, though, which is I think fairly unique, is the practice is people take pictures of a problem they find in the house. So if I went in a crawl space or an attic, those areas people don't see, and I just took a picture, say, of 3 or 4 problems, the impression might be that this place is a dump, that everything is awful under here.
Right.
So what I do is I go around the thing. I always go clockwise for some reason.
Okay.
And I take some pictures as I go along. And I put those in too, so you have a context.
Right.
There are a couple of problems. There's leaks under a bathroom. There are ductwork that's fallen apart, blowing nice hot air into your crawl space, despite the fact that you have a contract on the system. But actually, overall, the crawl space looks okay. Of course, once in a while, it doesn't look okay. And there are those specific problems and also large general problems of moisture intrusion. But giving people the context so that they get an accurate picture of the good and the bad.
Right.
That, to me, is the goal. there are a lot of legal restraints and rules on a home inspector, more than people would think. How we're supposed to report things, the minimum things. And I conform to them because I know it's smart to do that. And you'd be surprised how many reports I see from various people who they don't meet actually the legal requirements. But beyond that, I want my report to give people the story, the accurate story of the house.
Right.
Again, that context. So yes, and every house has some problems.
Sure.
Even the brand new house, I've never found one that I haven't found something. And there can be quite a lot. In general, there's not a lot on brand new,
Right.
but there's always some. So anyway, that's my goal in terms of and communicating in the report.
Right.
Sometimes people meet me at the site, which I usually say, leave me alone for the inspection, and then we'll at the end of it, we'll talk, and I'll point out some things, which will then you'll still get the report. But you're right, communication is important. As a professional person, I'm the pro in the relationship. The customer is an amateur. Once in a while, maybe they have construction experience, but it's rare.
Right.
So I view it as, and I try and make them comfortable. I say, ask me anything. Oh, well, this might be dumb. I said, no, nothing's dumb. Go ahead. If I was working in their area of expertise, I'd want them not to make fun of me for maybe an uninformed question. So again, communicate. It matters. The benefit to me also is if the report's good. Actually, there's not that many things to discuss. But two, people see that I'm really trying. They see the report. They see all those pictures. They see the willingness to talk. So they never have any question that my motivation is to inform them. And then, frankly, realtors who don't want their clients informed, they might have used me for a job once, and I'll never hear from them again, because they think I'm too, quote, picky.
Right.
But that suits me fine.
So we don't feel that way. I mean, we describe you as a walking MRI machine. When you go into a home, you report everything that you see, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And at the same time, the psychology of a broker in communicating, let's say, with their buyer, is to explain up front, okay, this home is 15 years old. There are going to be things that come up that even the seller is not aware of. We had a situation a couple of weeks ago where I met you at a home, and both of us we were representing the buyer, and we did not expect that the seller would be there. She was, which was fine. And she was a little nervous because she didn't know what the inspection process was all about. And you explained to her, what it is you do, what you check, and she was, of the opinion everything was in great shape and no issues. And we believed her 100%, but we also kind of take that with a grain of salt, don't we?
Absolutely. There's a tendency of all people to,
right.
They'll
defend
see
their home.
me looking at a spotlight that didn't come on.
That's right.
And I'll say, they'll be, well, I'm sure it's just the bulb. And you know something? I'm sure it's likely just the bulb too.
Right.
But I've also been at houses where the owner then decides to change the bulbs while I'm there. And guess what? It wasn't just the bulb one time in 100. So again, that's where if I can't get the spotlights to come on, I'm just going to put in the report. They didn't come on.
Right.
Then maybe I couldn't find the right switch. Maybe the sensor. But I'm giving that information. It can be checked. Then the owner can say, oh, no, I can make it come on here. Fine. Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
But yes, people tend to make the most optimistic assumptions. I'm not.
Yeah.
The houses run together. But if I'm not, it could be the house I remember recently where, the house looked good, many things, but then I went underneath, and guess what? A lot of leakage under the master bathroom shower.
Right.
A lot of damage.
Right.
And that's just the way it is. The owner didn't know.
That's right. And that turned into, by the way, that now we're referring to another home.
Yeah.
That, by the way, turned into a $6,000 to $7,000 repair. We went in after your report was done. We went in with licensed contractors who knew about these things, and they wrote up estimates. And I think it was closer to $7,000, where the entire floor of the shower had to be unearthed. There was a lot of damaged wood underneath. This is what we're talking about. And even the seat, the bench in the shower had to come out because it spread. And you caught it, and that's an extreme. And this was a high-end home,
right?
Built a beautifully built, custom-built home. The seller had zero knowledge of the situation. Stuff comes up when you go into the crawl space.
And that was a house where that shower was built with some flaw.
Yep.
So, but it had been there leaking for whatever it was, 15 years. Nobody knows. And the wood rots. And, one consequence of these bigger, more elaborate showers today is, if there's something wrong with them, you got to rip out a lot of it and replace it. So that's technically, well, not technically, legally, a home inspector, when they can, is supposed to move the insulation from around any drain pipe. So you're underneath the house, and the drain pipes come through the floor, and you're supposed to move that insulation and look to see if it's leaking. And many older homes have some small leakage under a toilet, under a tub drain. Sometimes it just leaks, the water goes down the pipe, it doesn't affect the wood. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it can be pretty significant. Sometimes you'll go in a very old 30 or 40-year-old house, and the whole bathroom floor and structure is a wreck, and people may have repaired. The other thing that happens sometimes is people go, oh, I think this home is wonderful. Everything's been redone. And you said take things with a grain of salt.
Right.
Yes, it all looks redone from the top, but we want to see what they did underneath. What did they just go over? Bad stuff, damaged stuff, which brings in or did they really get it right? And then you do get these gray areas. Well, yeah, there was some damage, and they went over some of the damage. Without getting too technical and legalistic. So there's some damage in the wood.
Yep.
And they go over it. So I'm going to show you that damage, even though I don't think it's necessarily leaking today. And someone may say, well, is it okay?
Right.
And people may be surprised at this, but technically a home inspector can't say to you that damaged board is okay. Technically, an engineer is supposed to do that. Now, in reality, people don't go hiring engineers to look at little things. So we're supposed to be careful. And again, my protection is I'm going to show you a picture of it. Now, if I really think it's shaky, I'm going to mention it a little different, a little harder. If there's a small area of old damage, I'm still going to inform you, but I don't want to set the client's hair on fire either, because the truth is when you get into 15, 25-year-old houses or older, the likelihood that there was never any leak in a bathroom is small, and the likelihood that there isn't going to be some stained wood or with maybe a little, again, that's small. And if you're, I've had clients or prospective clients where they're so worried about so many things that I actually can remember one I said, look, she was looking at like a 40-year-old, 50-year-old house, and she on the phone, she, well, do you think it would have lead paint? Do you think there could be lead in the solder? Do you think it could? I said, in the copper pipe. And finally, I said, I just didn't really want to work for her. I said, I think you need to go buy a new house. I mean, the person was so worried about so many things which were common in houses of that vintage that it was just not a good match. It'd be like, the old lady buying a hyper dog. It's just not a good match.
You're getting to you're touching on something that affects us all. We have a lot of younger buyers these days who are buying homes, and they want the charm and they want the ambiance, but they want the home to be in like brand new condition. And many of the older homes are not, and they would, as buyers, have to assume some maintenance risk over time in buying a home. And of course, they have the right to negotiate with the seller on anything that comes up on the home inspection report. And the way our contract is set up, the contract in North Carolina says properties are sold in as-is condition. That's what it says in the contract. It doesn't say that the seller will fix all these things or not fix all these things, and it doesn't say that the buyer will ask or not ask. In 97%, I don't know, of the cases, a willing buyer and a willing seller will negotiate repairs. If they can negotiate repairs satisfactorily, they move forward from due diligence to closing. If the seller is not willing to negotiate to the buyer's satisfaction, the buyer has a right to terminate and back out of the contract during their due diligence period. But in the majority of cases, a buyer and a seller will get together on an older home. But the problem that I see is that some people don't take a big picture view of the repairs. What they do is they will micromanage every little thing, which you are required to write. But that's part of the risk of home ownership, and that's offset by the reward of a better tax situation, ownership versus renting, and the possibility of building equity. And to do that, you have to assume a little bit of risk. So we're going to come back. There are a lot of things to talk about as far as a home inspection report is concerned and how it affects a contract here in Moore County. Our guest is John Pavan, Accurate Home Inspections, and we'll be back. This is All Things Moore County. Welcome back to the second part of All Things Moore County. I love that song, Dorothy. And it in a lot of ways, it does describe our guest, John Pavan. He is a very proactive home inspector. He is very articulate, and he is a great partner because he will help us long after the report is done for clarification. Sometimes, buyers or sellers will ask me as a broker about certain things that come up on a report, and there are certain things that, we're qualified to talk about, and there are certain things we're not qualified to talk about, and that's why we have people like John that we lean on when we can direct people to the expert based on the topic that they want to discuss, whatever that topic is that comes up. John, in speaking about, we were talking about this one house that had this, severe problem with the shower. That's a little uncommon. I mean, in many cases, if you're working with a home in the $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 range, there will be punch list items that come up, things that could be a result of maintenance that was not taken care of on a home. And you might have a punch list of things, and big picture, you might have $400, $500, $600 worth of repairs. And that is as common as, or more common than something that comes up as severely.
I'd say that's correct. Maybe a little, though I'd say the biggest thing we see over and over again, and people, in the reports I have all these standard paragraphs I've written over the years, and they are saved, and there's like 6 or 8 on moisture intrusion in crawl spaces. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you don't keep your gutters clean or no gutters, the water overflows, it drains next to the house, it soaks through the wall of the crawl space, and you're going to get some water staining on the block walls, humidity in the crawl, and you're going to get a little bit of what I call visible fungus growth.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And the truth is, I've never statistically figured it out, but the bulk of the older, slightly old, 10, 15 years and up crawl space houses, you're going to see some bit of visible fungus growth, which maybe if we tested it, we would actually say was mildew. But again, my feeling is if I see it, I'm taking a picture of it, okay? And I'll put a couple pictures and I'll say, these are like the worst areas I found. Because again, we're in a day and age where some people are very, very hung up on this stuff. And I think I've told the story many times that I came out of a crawl space and a young couple was there and they said, "How does it look?" And I said, "Well, pretty good overall. There's a little bit of visible fungus growth, just that way, casual. Use those words."
You encourage them not to dry apricots in the crawl space and that.
And
okay.
One of them, this look of horror came over the face.
Right.
And she said, "You mean black mold?" And I said, thinking to myself, I didn't say black, I didn't say mold, and I certainly didn't use that tone.
Right.
So again, this is where I don't want to sugarcoat anything. I get accused of bringing up too many things.
Right.
On the other hand, we shouldn't react to every bit of common crawl space condition as if it is that horror thing with black mold. I mean, I've been in crawl spaces where there are mushrooms growing on the wood, and you can take your screwdriver and literally stick it through a floor joist,
right? Because
it's so decayed, what people call dry rot, which is technically not an accurate term, but where fungus has literally eaten the substance of the wood. But that is incredibly rare. What we see most common is that little bit of moisture staining on the crawl space walls, a little higher humidity, a little bit of visible fungus. So that's actually kind of normal. But some people don't want anything to do with it. So I'm protecting myself. Plus, maybe someone is concerned. They've got a kid with asthma and they're convinced I'm not, it's not my job to tell them they shouldn't or not, is to report it, put it in some context again. And if you want a crawl space to be perfect, there are ways to make it perfect. Good maintenance is the start.
Circulation.
Well, more the gutters and downspouts. Make sure maybe, the land isn't real low next to the house.
Right.
We can go to another step with sealing things up and putting in dehumidifiers, which isn't actually that big a deal, and it's actually can be very good. So again, it's just, give people that information, and that's really my job. My job is to give people information, not to tell them to buy a house, not buy a house, not to tell them, to put it in context. But if you're looking at 25-year-old ranch houses with crawl spaces, and if you think you're going to find one with a crawl space that looks like,
bone dry,
a surgical operating theater, you're not going to find that unless somebody went in and did special stuff to it, which can be done. So again, that context, and a home inspector. Say somebody else, a heating and air guy, goes in a crawl space. He's just looking at the heating and air. A plumber, the plumbing. The termite guy, I go in. I'm supposed to be looking, and I'm looking at that heating and air. I'm looking at the plumbing. I'm looking at the electrical. I'm trying to evaluate moisture intrusion and its effect. Are there any plumbing leakage? Are there any support problems? And people worry a lot about structural things. Again, I tend to joke. I don't make fun of my customers really, but we have to have a little fun. But once in a while, people see a small drywall crack somewhere, and you get that. Is that a structural issue? So I'm teasing because I understand their concern. Most of the time, we don't find houses with major structural concerns. If I see say, a support pier under the house. Remember, we've got wood framing across the crawl space, and then there's some piers in the middle. That's, maybe once in a while I might find one that's, where there's a little gap above it or something, or a shim has come out. I'm going to report that, and it's something that should be taken care of. Now, it could very well be we can see that it's been like that for 20 or 30 years. So
Right.
obviously we shouldn't
Overreact.
be thinking we need to evacuate the home here, I mean, but again, I'm not going to ignore that. Legally, I don't have the right to ignore it. My job is to give you information. Technically, I don't have the legal right to say the house doesn't need that support. Between us, normal people, we might say, obviously, it's not super critical. But again, I have to operate in that legal world. And I also operate in a world where maybe some contractor who's trying to sell work will go in that crawl space. Oh, the home inspector should have told you that or something. So again, I'm going to tell you that. Again, I want people to understand. And there generally, there isn't a reason why something shouldn't be taken care of. Plus, even if something we might really think as common sense people, it's not a big deal. But if it is an obvious thing, you're buying the house. Well, when you go to sell the house, maybe the next home inspector will pick it up too, but then this time someone will want you to fix it. So maybe you should, again, as Bill said, most sellers and buyers are trying to make the deal.
Right.
So you negotiate. I've had buyers call me, you reported this thing on the roof and the seller won't do anything for me. And I say, I'm also a business person. I mean, before I was in this business, I've operated other small contracting businesses successfully. And I said, look, it's business. Get an estimate on that repair.
Right.
Make a judgment. Is the house a good deal?
Right.
And then, as men, let's not get into, chest thumping. I mean, even if the seller is being stubborn, if the house is still a good deal overall, just recognize, okay, it's a good deal, but you have a $750 roof repair or something. I mean, it can't be, it shouldn't be, I want to make him pay for it, if you can't, if you can, obviously.
You're talking directly and indirectly about a broker's ability to manage their clients' expectations and to talk about all of these things that could come up on a report prior to it being done so that the client is more prepared to receive it and to understand the big picture. We want to take a view from 500 feet, not, right up in our nose. But as far as a seller is concerned, when I list a home for sale, unless it's, new construction, I almost always ask the seller to consider doing what's called a pre-listing home inspection. And it amazes me. I mean, and I wish every seller would do that, but they don't. So to me, how can a seller negotiate a price on their home when they are unaware of the condition of that home? We had a situation where there were 3 offers on a home, and my client got the home, paid full price for it. Seller was unaware that there was anything wrong with the home, and as it turned out, there were quite a few things that needed to be addressed, and that should have been addressed. Now, had that seller known that through the discovery of a pre-listing home inspection, everybody could have been saved a lot of grief. And there's another saying, the more truth you give in a transaction, the better the transaction. And I just wish sellers would do more pre-listing inspections. We're going to come back and pick up on that because I want to talk to you about your experiences with pre-listing inspections and how they can help a transaction for both buyer and for seller. Because if a buyer can see the condition of a home, the buyer can make a more qualified offer at the same time. So it benefits both buyer and seller. Our guest is John Pavan. He is a home inspector here in Moore County, and we're talking about one of the Yeah, one of the most intricate parts of a real estate transaction. And we'd love to try to minimize the drama and put a real world spin on the process. This is All Things Moore County. We're back. This is the final set of All Things Moore County, speaking with John Pavan, all about home inspections in Moore County. We ended the second set talking a little bit about pre-listing inspections. If sellers did pre-listing inspections, it would be a precursor to a much smoother potential transaction. A well-informed buyer makes a well-informed offer. A seller is not caught off guard, and the situation where there were 3 offers on a home and the seller got full price, she started packing, she was moving, she had signed a lease, and all these repairs came up. What has your experience been with pre-listing inspections? Do you do a lot of them?
I do quite a few. I think there's some realtors who maybe tend to use me for those because my report has more detail and pictures, and I don't interrogate the realtors fully on their motivations. Maybe I should. But I think sometimes also we are dealing with sellers who, let's say, and I just did, I think, 2 last week.
Yeah.
And they were both sellers who were 90-ish or close.
Yeah.
Lived in the house for a long time. So they don't know what's going on in a crawl space or in the attic.
That's right.
Maybe they had a new roof put on 8-10 years ago, so they know that. So I think sometimes it can be as valuable in getting the seller to understand that the house may not be as perfect as they think it is.
Right.
And then all the reasons you mentioned, if this stuff comes up later on a buyer's inspection, then it throws a monkey wrench in the timing. Mm-hmm. The buyer may then, because it's on the seller's dime, thinks everything should be done to some unbelievable standard. Mm-hmm. So it can be a smart thing to do, that you can get things done in a timely way and a cost-effective way.
Correct.
So that if there is another inspection done,
no deer in the headlights look like, oh my gosh, what happened?
And then
where'd that come from?
You get buyers who do get scared of things.
Sure.
And you can, sometimes the sale falls apart or just the timing and the dispute, etc. So it can, if somebody wants a smoother experience, I think it's, as a seller, it's probably a smart thing to do. I mean, the other argument is it's a crapshoot. Maybe the buyer will get a poor home inspection he won't catch some stuff and you'll get away with it. I mean, most people don't think that's what they want to do, but effectively that could happen. But you'd be surprised, again, especially if the house has any age on it at all. Right. And age, I mean, 10, 15 years and up, there's almost always going to be stuff that people don't know about.
That's right.
And especially when people get older, the maintenance tends to slip because maybe they used to clean the gutters themselves, but they haven't been doing it, and they have to hire some handyman, but he hadn't really been doing it right. There's a lot of things can happen, and they just don't know.
People will sometimes give us a harder time about doing a pre-listing inspection, but almost invariably, those sellers that have done that, number one, they sell their house more quickly. Right. They have more truth to share, and looking back, they're very appreciative. They might not be upfront. They might go, why are you making me do all this? But when they look back with their perspective, they'll say it was the best thing they ever did. And they're selling probably the largest asset that they own, and they're just investing a little bit. Even in a situation where you do a pre-listing inspection and you get a laundry list of things that need to be done, you share that with the buyer. Even if the seller doesn't address the items, but they're there to be seen, that still makes for a better communication.
Well, and that's just everybody's making an informed decision.
Exactly.
The other thing, again, back to crawl spaces, you may have a heating and air guy going in there every 6 months to a year, but he's looking the tunnel frequently. I don't want to say frequently. He's got tunnel vision on that unit that's in the crawl, and he's not even going to the other side of the crawl and doesn't know that there's a duct that's disconnected. He doesn't know that there's moisture coming in off the deck. The guy doing the termite inspection, he's specifically, they're looking at very narrow things. And I've gone in crawl spaces where there's standing water in there, and no one's bothered to tell the owner because, they're in a hurry. They did their job and they're gone, I'm assuming. So if you want a smoother thing, now obviously someone say, oh, you just want to sell inspections. Not to be cocky, though I get accused of that. Frankly, I turn away work, so I'm not like If you want it smoother, if you don't want to get surprised, if you want to be able to get things repaired in a cost-effective manner,
right,
it's something to consider at least.
Yeah. We always want to work with you because we want the most detailed report on behalf of our buyer. We don't care if it's a lot of stuff. It is what it is. We don't want our client, after they buy the home, to come back later and go, how come we didn't know about this? How come, our home inspection didn't reveal this? So the more information we have to negotiate with up front, the better everyone gets served.
Well, one thing, again, I put a picture in of any significant problem I'm reporting.
Right.
So I don't have to hear later that I'm like exaggerating. Here's the picture.
Right.
Here it is. Here's the screwdriver sticking in the wood. Here's the water leaking. So we established right away that the condition exists. And now what's to be done about it goes from there. But we get that that's settled.
There are a couple of things that come up often. Sealed crawl spaces and metal roofs.
Okay.
Sometimes sellers will be very proud of the fact that they have sealed their crawl space, or they don't have any issues with their roof because they installed a metal roof. That doesn't always translate in reality.
Well, you picked the hat and the shoes here of the house.
That's right.
So we'll go metal roofs. There's a lot of different types of metal roofs.
Yeah.
Metal roofs are not all the same. There are very high quality, what's called standing seam roofs, which can cost 2 or 3 times what a shingle roof costs, quite expensive. And then there are lesser quality roofs, which have what we call exposed fasteners. They're screws that go down through the surface of the roof. Each screw has a little rubber grommet on it. And obviously, if you have 1,000 screws, which is maybe, who knows how many, there's probably many thousands, each with a grommet, each one of those is a potential leak point. So we have to discriminate between the two types of roofs, and people shouldn't just assume that a metal roof is infinitely better than a shingle roof.
That's correct.
So you got to be careful about what you're looking at. The exposed fastener roof can be done well, but it is more subject, and I immediately scan that roof with my binoculars if I can't get up close, and I'm looking for fasteners that aren't right, popped up, installed at an angle. Usually I'm going to see some, sometimes a lot, and I'm going to report that and then recommend the roof be evaluated. Again, I could always go into greater technical detail. Those roof panels, the manufacturer prescribes where the fasteners should be put in. Installers don't always put them in where they're supposed to, according to the manufacturer, and there's a whole argument there.
With the warranty,
So whereas the installers want to put them on the raised part of the roof because it's actually less likely to leak, but it gives you less wind resistance. So that's a crapshoot too. Who's really right? The manufacturer says put them on the flat part because it get more wind resistance. And if you put the fastener in wrong and it leaks, well, that's not my fault. That's your fault.
Right.
So it gets complicated. I know those details, and the judgment and the critique I make of the roof reflects those details.
The other issue that comes up, and I've been through this with you, where a crawl space has been sealed.
Okay.
And people think, great, nothing to worry about. We already have a sealed crawl space, but that isn't always the case.
Well, one thing we start with too is there are a lot of good or bad, there's a lot of rules in the modern world, okay?
Yeah.
So a normal or a typical crawl space has foundation vents, little rectangles with screening so air can come in and out. And there's a whole argument in the building science world as to how valuable venting a crawl space with hot, humid southern air is. But that's a separate argument.
Mm-hmm.
If you close those vents, seal them off, or build the foundation, the crawl space with no vents, then we have a whole different set of rules where you're supposed to have drain installed in the crawl space. You're supposed to have a high quality plastic barrier on the floor. You're supposed to have some way of mechanically drying. That sounds complicated, but it usually means a dehumidifier, an exhaust fan, or some of your heated or cooled air blowing into the crawl space. Usually, I find a sealed crawl space, even on a brand new house. Somebody hasn't done one of those things properly.
Right.
On the retrofitted crawl spaces, which a number of the termite companies now do those,
Yep.
I invariably find, again, they've left out some of the things. I called one of the major national company local people once, and I said, how come you guys do this? Every single one. And he says, we thought those were just recommendations. I said, it's in the code. It's like, and in continuing ed for us, they would give us a checklist. Though I've seen some home inspectors say, I don't do sealed crawl spaces. We just beyond the home inspection. So then we could get into a whole debate as to whether the rules make sense.
Right.
But I'm not legally allowed to say, hey, these are the rules, but I ordain that you don't need to follow them. So again, I'm going to point out the obvious omission. And if someone wants to ask me, do I think it's a big deal that there's no drain in the crawl space or a sump pump? I'm going to say, not for me to say.
Right.
It's obviously not there. I'm pointing it out. You should know that. The owner probably doesn't realize that was a requirement because the company that sold him the work didn't tell him. And that's that. I don't even know. I'm assuming most of the time.
Yeah. So you report the news. You don't say it's good news or bad news. You say, here's the news.
I will, in the formal report, I've got to report, I feel, the rules and whether they followed them.
Okay.
I'll also tell you whether the conditions are good now. Okay. Now, if someone says, well, do you think it's important that there's no sump pump or drain? I'll say, look, under certain conditions, if you got a big leak under there, it would be better to have that. Now, the idea that the sealed crawl space is going to hold water perfectly and it isn't just going to drain out the doorway area, I do think that's a bit unrealistic. So you could make just as much of an argument that you should have a drain or a sump pump in every crawl space as in the... But again, the powers that be, that write the code, they say if you seal it, if you build it, there's supposed to be a drain. So I report it. That's partly covering my ass. Partly I don't want to hear later that someone says, and if this house is the 1 in 1,000 where there is a leak, and we know it.
One last question before we wind down. A lot of people might be surprised that a home inspection would be a good idea on a new construction home.
Obviously, a brand new house almost always has less problems than a 15 or 20 or certainly 100-year-old house. I have never done a new house where I didn't find something wrong. And how important that is could be minor. But I've done new houses where there was major areas in the attic that they just forgot to insulate. A common thing on new houses is trim around doors and garage door openings or at the roof is allowed to touch the concrete or the asphalt shingles. Most of the materials, you're not allowed to do that, but builders routinely do it. And for some reason, the town people allow them to do it. I have done new houses, crawl space houses where there's already terrible water intrusion into the crawl space. So you never know. In general, if you were going to skip a home inspection, it would be better to skip it with a new house than a 100-year-old house. But
Right.
you just never know.
That's
and
right.
if you want to take that gamble on your $400,000 or $300,000 house, the other thing too is obviously getting the information prior to closing
Right.
gives you a little bit more leverage on the builder taking care of things
Sure, the
in
punch
a
list.
timely,
Prior to
thorough
closing,
manner.
not after the fact.
And in the houses that I found that were new, where there really were serious problems going on, sometimes then it was good, I come back or something, which we don't normally have to do.
Yeah.
But even brand new, the town people don't check the grading on lots always.
Right.
So you could be having water problems even in that brand new house, and you better to know it. So again, it's your gamble if you go without it.
John, thanks for coming in and talking with us. Suffice it to say that buyers and sellers can both benefit from understanding the home inspection process up front, so that they are prepared as they go through the due diligence process on their way to closing, just to encourage more seamless transactions with a better understanding by both parties. And your ability to communicate it is a great asset to us, and you help reinforce the things that we say. So we appreciate your time, we appreciate your energy, and we appreciate your thoroughness.
Well, you're welcome, Bill.
All right, John. This is All Things Moore County, and I hope you found this show of value for your future buying or selling needs. Thank you.